My mother called me on a Sunday morning and said, "You are going to sell that house to your sister at the price she decides, or you are no longer part of this family." I was standing in my kitchen drinking coffee. Outside, the October light was coming through the window the way it did every morning, through the glass I had replaced, across the floors I had refinished, over the counters I had saved 14 months to install. The house was mine. I had bought it 3 years earlier, renovated it for 2 years on evenings and weekends with my own hands, and turned down 2 offers already because I was not ready to sell. My sister Paige wanted it for $40,000 below asking price. My parents believed she deserved it because she deserved most things. I said no. My mother said disowned. I said, "Before you do anything, you should know something about the man Paige works for." The phone went very quiet. "He already owns a house on that street," I said. "He bought it 4 months ago. I have the deed." What happened in the next 72 hours ended a real estate deal, a family ultimatum, a professional relationship my sister had spent 4 years building, and a story my parents had been telling about the two of us since we were children. I want to tell you all of it. Before I take you all the way back, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely stays with you. Drop your city and the time in the comments right now. I always love knowing where you're watching from. My name is Maren Holloway. I'm 33 years old. I'm a licensed contractor and residential restoration specialist in Greensboro, North Carolina. I buy houses other people have given up on, restore them with my own hands, and sell them to people who will love them. I have done this 7 times. I am currently on my 8th. This is the story of the 6th house, the one on Birchwood Lane, and everything that was buried underneath a family ultimatum that was never really about real estate. Let me take you back to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The house on Chesterfield Drive, where I grew up. 4 bedrooms, nice neighborhood, the kind of house that was always a little too neat, like living in a place that was performing tidiness rather than actually resting in it. My father, Gene Holloway, was a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical distributor. He was good at his job in the specific way that people are good at jobs that require them to be slightly different versions of themselves depending on who they're talking to. My mother, Renee, taught kindergarten for 12 years and then stopped when Paige was born, which was 4 years after I was born, and which was, as far as I could observe, the central event in the Holloway family calendar. Paige was what my parents called spirited. What they meant was she wanted things, and she communicated this loudly and with complete confidence that wanting was sufficient cause for receiving. She was not malicious. I want to say that clearly. She was a person who had been handed so many things for so long that the mechanism for earning had simply never developed. By the time we were adults, me at 29, her at 25, she had the energy of someone waiting to be given the next thing and the confusion of someone who couldn't understand why it kept not arriving. I was what my parents called independent. What they meant was she handles herself, which freed them to focus their attention elsewhere. I had a job at 16, hardware store on Stratford Road, $8.75 an hour, where I spent my breaks reading renovation books I'd pulled from the clearance shelf. I paid for my own truck at 19, a used F-150 with 140,000 miles that I kept running through sheer stubbornness and a YouTube education in basic mechanics. I got my contractor's license at 24. I bought my first house, a 2-bedroom bungalow in a neighborhood nobody wanted yet, at 25 for $87,000. I renovated it myself over 11 months and sold it for $139,000. Then I did it again. My parents did not object to any of this. They were not opposed to my success in the way some parents are opposed to children who outgrow them. They were simply uninterested in proportion to how much it didn't involve Paige. When I sold my second house, my mother said, "That's wonderful, Marin. Paige just got promoted. Did you hear?" When I got my general contractor's license upgrade, my father said, "Good for you. Hey, do you know anyone who could help Paige find a place to rent? She's looking." Not mean, just calibrated to a frequency that wasn't mine. Paige worked in commercial real estate. She had gotten a position as a junior acquisitions associate at a development company in Greensboro called Pinnacle Group, which was run by a man named Warren Creed, 52 years old, self-made, the kind of businessman local papers wrote profiles about every 18 months. Paige had been there 4 years. She talked about Warren Creed the way people talk about a person who has recognized their potential in a way others haven't, which is to say, with a reverence that had over time started to sound less professional and more personal. My mother found this exciting. My father found it impressive. I found it worth noting. The house on Birchwood Lane came to me through my contractor network in the spring of my 30th year. 3-bedroom craftsman, 1940s construction, original hardwood under 3 layers of carpet, plaster walls, a kitchen that had not been updated since 1987, and therefore had bones that modern renovations had destroyed in 1,000 similar houses by trying to help. The previous owner had died. The estate needed to close. I paid $112,000 in cash from my renovation fund and got the keys on a Thursday. I spent 2 years on that house. I want to be specific because the time matters to what happens later. 22 months, to be precise. I stripped every floor myself. I replastered 4 rooms. I rebuilt the kitchen cabinets from salvaged oak because the originals had been damaged, and I refused to put flat-pack boxes in a house with that kind of history. I rewired the second floor, replaced every window, rebuilt the front porch from the foundation posts up. I had help sometimes, 2 guys I trusted for electrical and HVAC, but the bones of the restoration were mine. My hands, my evenings, my Saturdays. By the time it was done, the house on Birchwood Lane was the best thing I had ever made. I listed it at $274,000. 2 offers came in the first week. One at asking, one $8,000 over. I turned both down, which my agent called unusual, and which I called knowing what something is worth and not being in a hurry. I wanted the right buyer, someone who would understand what was in the floors and the walls and the porch, someone who would not immediately rip it out and put something modern and flat in its place. My mistake was mentioning this to my mother. "You're sitting on a $250,000 house," she said on a Sunday call in September. "Do you know what Paige could do with that house?" I said, "It's not for Paige." She said, "Have you even asked her if she's interested?" I said, "It's not for Paige. I have it listed." My mother said, "Listed doesn't mean sold. Paige has been looking for something to buy for 2 years. She could use that house." I said, "Then she can make an offer through my agent like everyone else." The offer came 9 days later. $234,000. $40,000 below asking price. No inspection contingency waived. No explanation of the gap. Just a number typed into a standard offer form with Paige Holloway's name at the top. I rejected it by end of business. My agent called me the next morning. "Your sister called me directly," she said. Her name was Donna, and she had been working with me for 4 years and had developed a tone I recognized, the one she used when something was becoming complicated. She asked me to explain why you wouldn't accept her offer. I told her you had the right to reject any offer. She said to tell you she'd be going to your parents. I said, "Thank you, Donna." I knew what going to my parents meant. I had known it my whole life. My mother called that evening. My father called the next morning. My mother used the language of disappointment. You have an opportunity to help your sister, and you're choosing not to. My father used the language of legacy. Families take care of families, Marin. That's the whole point of building anything. Neither of them asked about the 2 years I had spent on that house. Neither of them asked what the market was doing, what my costs had been, what I had turned down already. Neither of them asked me anything. They told me what to do. I said no, calmly both times. No. The Sunday morning call from my mother, the one that opened this story, came 4 days after that. You are going to sell that house to your sister at the price she decides, or you are no longer part of this family. I want to pause on that sentence. Not for the drama of it. I had heard variations of this sentence my entire life, always about Paige, always as a closing argument that was meant to end the negotiation by raising the stakes high enough that I'd fold. It had worked before. When I was 19 and Paige needed a cosigner for a car, and my parents pressured me into it, and she made 11 of 36 payments. When I was 24 and my parents wanted me to give Paige a job on my first renovation crew because she needed experience, and she showed up twice. When I was 27 and they wanted me to give her $3,000 from my renovation fund because she was short on rent. I had said yes to all of these, not because I believed in them, but because the machinery of family guilt is a powerful mechanism, and I had not yet found the off switch. I had found it now. But before I said no, before I said anything, I said, before you do anything, you should know something about the man Paige works for. Here is what I knew, and how I knew it. 3 weeks earlier, I had been pulling permits for the Birchwood Lane listing at the Guilford County Register of Deeds. Standard process. Verifying the chain of title before closing. The clerk was slow that day, and I had time to browse the recent transfers on Birchwood Lane out of habit, the way contractors do when they're curious about a neighborhood's trajectory. There were 4 transfers in the past 18 months. One of them, recorded 4 months earlier, was a property 2 doors down from mine, 2214 Birchwood Lane, a 4-bedroom Dutch colonial that had sold for $318,000. The buyer of record was a Delaware LLC called Creed Capital Holdings, LLC, Warren Creed. I had stared at that transfer record for a long time. Then I had gone home and done what I do when something doesn't add up. I documented it. I pulled the full deed. I pulled the LLC registration from the Delaware Secretary of State database. Public record. $0, 10 minutes of searching. I pulled Warren Creed's name from Pinnacle Group's website, his bio, his photo. I cross-referenced the registered agent of Creed Capital Holdings. I found 2 other LLCs registered to the same agent with overlapping addresses. I found a second property registered to a related LLC in a neighborhood 3 miles away that had been purchased 8 months ago. Warren Creed was buying residential properties in Greensboro personally through LLCs in neighborhoods where Pinnacle Group, the company he ran, the company Paige worked for, had not yet made commercial acquisitions. That is called insider positioning. It is the practice of acquiring personal investments in areas you have advanced knowledge of through your professional role before the larger institutional money moves in and raises values. It is not always illegal. It depends on contract, disclosure, fiduciary duty. But it is always worth examining. And it was at minimum a significant conflict of interest for the CEO of a development company to be buying residential properties in corridors his company was actively evaluating, without disclosing this to his board, his investors, or, presumably, the junior acquisitions associate he had tasked with evaluating those same corridors. The junior acquisitions associate who was trying to buy a house on Birchwood Lane. I said to my mother, Warren Creed bought a house on Birchwood Lane 4 months ago, through a shell company, while Paige was working acquisitions in that corridor for his company. A pause. I have the deed. Silence. What does that mean? My mother said. It means the man your daughter has been working for, and telling this entire family is going to change her career, has been using her professional work to position his personal investments. And either Paige knows about it and is involved, or she doesn't know about it and she's been used. I paused. Either way, it is not a situation you want to escalate by making this a family conflict that ends up in a lawyer's office. My mother said, "I have to call your father." She hung up. "I want to pause here and ask you something directly, and I want you to think about it before you answer in the comments. If you had discovered that someone your family trusted was potentially using your sibling in a professional scheme, would you have said something to protect your sibling even after they just tried to force you out of your own property? Or would you have stayed silent and let it play out? I've asked a lot of people this. The answers are not what you'd expect. Tell me yours below. What happened in the next 72 hours, I know partly from direct experience, and partly from what my mother told me later, in pieces over several months. My father called his brother, who was a real estate attorney in Charlotte. His brother spent 40 minutes with the documents I had compiled. I emailed them within an hour of hanging up with my mother, and called my father back. What he said, as relayed to me later, the situation was serious. The LLC structure was consistent with deliberate obfuscation. The timing relative to Pinnacle Group's acquisition evaluations was not something you want your daughter's name adjacent to. He recommended Paige retain independent counsel before doing anything. Paige did not take this well. She called me on Monday evening. I want to be fair about this call. She was not the screaming, entitled version of herself I had braced for. She was frightened. Her voice had the quality of someone whose floor has shifted and who is running the math on what that means. "How long have you known?" she said. I told her, 3 weeks. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I wasn't sure what I was looking at, and because you were in the middle of trying to force me out of my own house." She was quiet. "That's fair," she said. First time in my memory she had said those 2 words in that order about something involving me. She retained an attorney, a woman named Claudia Park, who specialized in employment and fiduciary matters. Claudia reviewed the documents. She found more than I had. Warren Creed had not just purchased 2 properties personally in Pinnacle Group acquisition corridors. He had purchased 6 across 3 years through 4 separate LLCs, using advanced knowledge of his company's acquisition pipeline that he had obtained through his role as CEO. He had not disclosed any of this to Pinnacle Group's board or its investor group. Paige had been, in Claudia's assessment, an unwitting participant. Her corridor evaluations had functionally informed Creed's personal buying decisions without her knowledge or consent. Claudia filed a whistleblower complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission and a separate civil claim on Paige's behalf against Warren Creed personally and Pinnacle Group as an entity. The complaint outlined 6 properties, 3 years of undisclosed conflict of interest, and the use of a subordinate employee's professional work product to generate personal financial gain. Warren Creed resigned from Pinnacle Group 6 weeks after the complaint was filed. The board, once presented with the documentation, accepted his resignation within 4 business hours. The civil claim is ongoing. I cannot share the expected outcome. What I can tell you is that Claudia Park told Paige during a check-in call, "You did not do anything wrong. You were in a position where doing your job correctly made someone else very wealthy without your knowledge. That ends now." Paige called me after that call. She said, "I keep thinking about the house." I said, "What about it?" She said, "I wanted it so badly. And now I understand I wanted it because Warren had already been buying on that street and he kept telling me it was going to be the next big corridor. And I thought if I could buy there too, I'd be—" She stopped. I didn't know what he was doing, but I think I was chasing his certainty without asking where it came from. I said, "Yeah." She said, "That's a me problem." I said, "It's a fixable one." She said, "Is it?" I said, "You just filed a whistleblower complaint against a CEO. That's not the behavior of someone who can't fix things. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I've never done anything hard before. I said, I know. You're doing one now. That was the best conversation, my sister, and I have ever had. Let me tell you what happened to the house on Birchwood Lane. I sold it in December to a couple named David and Erica Suarez. He was a high school history teacher. She ran a small catering business from home. They had been looking for 2 years. They came through on a Saturday morning, and I watched Erica run her hand along the salvaged oak cabinets in the kitchen and stop. "Did you make these?" she said. I said, "Yes." She looked at her husband. He looked at her. I knew then. They paid $271,000, $3,000 below asking, which I accepted because they were right. I sat at the closing table and signed the documents and drove home and sat in my truck in the driveway of my next project, a 1952 split level on the east side of Greensboro that needed everything, and let myself feel for a few minutes the specific satisfaction of something finished and given to the right people. That house is someone's home now. That's the point of all of it. My parents took 3 months to fully process what had happened. My mother called me in January and said, "I owe you an apology for the disowned conversation." I said, "Yes." She said, "I didn't think about the fact that what you built was yours. I only thought about what Paige wanted." I said, "I know." She said, "I've been doing that her whole life. I see that now." I said, "I know that too." She said, "Is there a version of this where we're okay?" I said, "There's a version where we're working on it. That's what I can offer." She said, "I'll take it." My father called the following week. He asked about the new project on the east side. He asked specific questions: foundation condition, roof age, what I was planning for the kitchen. He had never asked specific questions about my work before. I answered all of them. At the end of the call, he said, "You know what you're doing." It was not an apology, but from my father it was a translation of one, and I have learned to read the translations. Paige moved to a new firm, a boutique commercial real estate company in Durham, where the principal, a woman named Sandra Okafor, had been watching the Pinnacle Group situation with professional interest. Sandra called Paige directly after the complaint became public. She said, "I need someone who can identify what other people miss and isn't afraid to say what they find." Paige started in February. She called me on her first day. "It's different here," she said. "They ask my opinion in meetings." I said, "Good." She said, "I think I've been in the wrong rooms my whole career." I said, "Now you know what right feels like." She is figuring out how to earn things. It is slow and it is real, and I am watching it the way I watch early-stage renovations, with patience and without outcome guarantees, because the bones are good and bones are what matter. The house at 2214 Birchwood Lane, Warren Creed's property, the Dutch colonial 2 doors down from mine, was listed for sale by the receivership managing his asset dissolution in March. It sold in 11 days at $327,000. I looked up the buyer. A young couple. First home. No LLC, no shell company. Just 2 names on a deed, a 30-year mortgage, and a closing date in April. That's what a house on a good street is for. Here is what I want to say before I go. There is a kind of family pressure that does not come from cruelty. It comes from a story the family has been telling about, who is central and who is peripheral, who needs and who provides, who is worth advocating for, and who will manage. This story runs so deep that the people inside it often cannot see it. They are not trying to harm you. They have simply never looked at the structure from the outside. The ultimatum my mother delivered on that Sunday morning, sell or be disowned, was not the worst thing my family ever did to me. The worst thing was the 29 years before it, in which my capacity to handle things was treated as a license to expect that I would, in which independence was not praised but assumed. in which I built and saved and restored and earned, and the family story continued to orbit someone else. I do not hold that against my parents with heat anymore. I hold it with clarity, which is quieter and more useful. What I know is this: what you build with your hands belongs to you, not to the family story, not to the person the family has decided deserves the next thing, not to the person your CEO has been quietly positioning around. To you, a deed with your name on, it is not a negotiating chip in someone else's conversation. It is the record of what you made and what you chose and what you refused to give away because the price was wrong. Know what your things are worth. Know what you are worth. And when someone slides a number across the table that insults both, say no, calmly, without drama, and then go back to work. The right buyers exist, for houses and for everything else. Wait for them. My name is Maren Holloway. I am 33 years old. I am on my 8th house. It needs everything, which means it has everything, which is exactly what I look for. I was told I would be disowned if I didn't sell. I said no. I am still here. The house on Birchwood Lane is someone's home. My sister is in the right room for the first time. My parents are learning a new version of the story. And the man who thought he could use a junior employee to map his personal investments while her family pressured her sister to sell into his corridor. He's not in the building anymore. The bones were always good. I just had to know where to look. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. If this story found you at a moment when someone is trying to tell you what your work is worth, drop a comment below. Tell me what you're building and what they said about it. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, share it with the person in your life who has spent years building quietly while someone else got the credit. They need to hear this today. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.